Well, thanks everyone for coming today to today's IAP2 Intermountains Learning Lunch. I'm really excited about the session today because it's interactive. It's really for us to share stories and share ideas about challenges of in-person facilitation after the past 2 years. Some of you might have recently facilitated a session in person and notice some things were a bit afoot, or you might have some concerns at reading Reddit threads or seeing conversations on Twitter and worried what's going to happen when you're asked to facilitate in person. So I think a few of you know me. I'm Liz Bueller. I am IAP2 Intermountains Utah State Rep. My day job, I am with Salt Lake City Corporation. I'm the innovation team lead for the city. So I am going to put everyone on the spot. If you can, turn your camera, great for interaction because this is an open discussion. You don't have to, but it is highly encouraged as we talk today. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'd like to start by actually just asking everyone to go around, introduce yourselves and just why you came to the session today. So, and I'll be honest, I'll start again. I'm Liz Bueller, and I'm here because with Salt Lake City, we've recently had some issues where we long have passion debate in Salt Lake City about local, specifically zoning issues. Notice that the discourse we've had in our recent sessions have turned very personal to people who don't agree with each other. And I wanted to come here just to talk about it and also see if anyone has some tips on what we can do to help facilitate good discussion. Who would like to go next?
This is Sky. I'm sorry, I don't have a camera on my computer.
It's fine, Sky.
I can't show myself, but I work for State of Utah in the Department of Environmental Quality, Division of Drinking Water. I don't have any recent experience facilitating. I wanted to join and just more curious to hear what others have been experiencing.
I can go next. My name is Charisse Walker, and I handle project communications for UDOT in Region 4. So I'm based down in St. George. Like Sky, I think I'm here to kind of hear what other people have experienced. We've started, having more in-person meetings. Usually we have a virtual meeting, one event, and then a in-person meeting another day instead of trying to do a hybrid thing. And I haven't personally experienced anything too negative, but I think there's just a lot of tentativeness about being in big groups and how those interactions are going to happen. We've seen driver behavior change over the last year, and I think that that's just an extension of individual behavior, kind of a shift, being less patient with other people. And so, yeah. That's it.
Well, I can go next. I'm Wendy Lowe, and I'm the treasurer for the Intermountain chapter, although after 24 years of living in Idaho, I have moved to Colorado, so I don't technically belong to the chapter, but I'm still involved. At any rate, I have been a facilitator for over 3 decades, and I was quite excited to have a chance to begin working with people in person. And I have a task force I'm working with right now that's focused on rental housing in the city of Fort Collins. And I was quite alarmed at some of the behaviors that I saw in the first few meetings of this task force. They're meeting every couple of weeks. And it was like Twitter had moved in person or something. And so I'm really concerned about what's life like coming out of COVID when we get people back together again.
Thanks, Wendy. Jordan, would you like to introduce yourself and talk about why you attended today? Hey, Jordan.
Hi, hi everyone. Nice to see you. My name's Jordan Catcher. I work for the state's Community Development Office, but I'll be changing positions fairly soon. I have 3 weeks left with the state, and then I'll be joining Danya Ramore in the Environmental Dispute Resolution Program at the U. So very, very excited about that transition and the possibilities within it. And so I was just happy to even just have a little bit of time to just check in and check in with the chapter and to, yeah, just kind of talk about just what all this transition looks like. And even for our office, you know, it's been really interesting kind of thinking about our work is predominantly in rural Utah. And so for, you know, the past 2+ years, we haven't been traveling out there. And so as we're trying to figure out what does this look like moving forward, I was just interested in hearing from others and yeah, just connecting in general.
Very great. Well, thank you, Jordan, and thank you everyone else for joining us today. I hope you find the discussion useful. So, want to start off? Wendy shared a story about what happened recently. Does anyone else want to share a recent story of something I might have experienced in group discussion? So if people are comfortable, I know sometimes we're a little too Salt Lake focused, so I apologize for that, but that's my experience since I work for the city. We've recently had a session where we have, for those of you who know, I think it's happening not just here in Salt Lake, but everywhere in the state of Utah, where we're having an issue with housing affordability. And we really are having a very big discussion on how do we address that affordability. Density seems to be something that people really latch onto, increasing density across the city. The city traditionally is very low density, single family zoning, and increasing the numbers. And some of the neighborhoods that are traditionally single family are starting to push back with higher density coming possibly within their neighborhood or adjacent to their neighborhood. Recently, we had an issue, and this has actually happened in multiple cases, but recently we had an issue where a community group hosted their own public meeting about increasing density in their neighborhood. And the city was invited as one of on a panel of speakers. But what happened was that some of the residents in this community who frankly supported density when others didn't, they worked for other organizations like the University of Utah. And what happened was some of the panel was upset that they argued for increased density, and they actually went and talked to the Utah chancellor about the issue, about these residents who also happened to be professors at the U, that they felt that the person was trying to represent the university in these meetings. And it became a big issue about what happens now, especially with social media. And oftentimes when you're in a live meeting, you'll have people, even if you're not doing at the same time a hybrid meeting where you're participating on Facebook or some type of live stream, you have people who are constantly tweeting out during meetings. I think it's happened to all of us. And so there was this big draw about where does their personal Twitter stop and when does they have to consider that they're representatives of the university. And the city got drawn in because we were on the panel, and it's become a big thing. And honestly, we don't really know what to do about it. It was a session that we didn't sponsor. We attended as participants, but because we are the city and we're the zoning regulators, we sort of got stuck in the middle.
I'll provide a more fulsome explanation of my story. This task force is focused on some issues around rental housing in the city of Fort Collins, and things like density and affordability are part of the conversation as well. The task force is composed half of renters and half of property managers, either landlords or some rental agencies. But there's a power differential in the room because the renters are really struggling to find places to live, and the property managers obviously have a lot more power. At any rate, I have to tell you, it was kind of scary walking into the room as a facilitator for the first time in 2 years. I have a lot of experience facilitating, but you just felt like, wow, I haven't done this in a while. I can Zoom, but I don't know. So anyway, the opening of the meeting, we did introductions and I laid down ground rules, and it all felt really like I was from outer space, the way people were receiving me. At any rate, I think it was the third meeting, one of the landlords was talking about a bad experience he'd had with somebody moving out of an apartment. And I was moving paper, flip chart paper, so that I could put up a new piece of paper. And I did not actually hear this remark, but somebody in the room said, even dirt bags need a place to live. So I didn't hear it, because I was scrabbling with a paper, but I was told about it by numerous people, and a lot of the renters really felt personally attacked by the comment. And so I was really alarmed. I had been observing some sort of not real good behaviors, but at any rate, so that's really what got me here, was this, why would anybody use that kind of language in a public? It's not really a public meeting, it's a task force, but still it's 20 members of the public. So we're now at meeting 7. They're meeting every other week. And as we move along, I'll tell you a little bit about something that happened last night.
Well, Wendy, that's actually a good lead into on ideas on how we can encourage good discussion. Because I think specifically about that comment, you didn't hear, but it was told to you afterwards. If you don't mind me asking, how did you address it? Because there's a few techniques, like you hear it, depending on the situation, like talk to that person when it's not during a meeting, but in between meetings, talk to them about their behavior and how, or sometimes it's even just addressing it directly after you hear about it in a meeting. So people feel like they were heard and you understood their issues with that statement. What did you do?
I did not know in the space of that same meeting.
Yeah.
I heard about it later. And I reached out to the individual who actually thought he was being funny when he made the comment, and was, sort of like, well, I'm just saying what other people were thinking. And I said, yeah, but we're responsible for the way messages land. But at any rate, on a more fulsome response, I start every meeting with ground rules, and they include treat others with kindness and respect, and listen to understand, which means if somebody says something that you don't agree with, don't start building the argument, start listening harder to figure out where they're coming from. But the other thing that I've been doing with this group is, there's 20 of them. I make every effort to get the conversation smaller. We spend very little time in the hollow U. I do World Cafe or Think, Pair, Share or card storming, anything to get the conversation smaller so that people are looking into each other's eyes and listening with their hearts open. Sometimes I'm not a real touchy-feely facilitator, but I've found myself needing those techniques more than I ever have in my whole life to create space. And I also start every meeting, I put their name tents where I want them to sit, and I mix them and mix them and mix them so they're never sitting next to the same people twice. I've never been this neurotic. I have diagrams of how I sound people from every meeting so that I can make sure I get them mingled up. And there's a couple dynamics I'm going to be avoiding because things didn't go so well between a couple of people a couple times. But at any rate, I think all of those ideas have been helpful. Just so it doesn't feel boring, and but it also feels more personal.
Let me ask, you're just a wealth of information, Wendy. Does everyone know those facilitation techniques that Wendy mentioned that she used when she broke up the group? World Cafe, share pair, and I always just call the cards. I'm bad with proper terms. Do you mind, Wendy, do you mind just giving like a
I'll do a quickie
short
on those.
description?
So World Cafe, you put people at small tables, and my preference is 4s. And then you have conversations at the table, but you ask multiple questions, 3 to 5 questions, and you move people between every question so that they talk to different people on each question. The questions are designed so they build on each other. So the first question might be, what challenges have you faced? And then the second question is, what have you found useful in dealing with those challenges? So they feel forced to go back and review what they'd heard at the prior conversation. And what it does is it provides an opportunity for the ideas to knit around the room. Think, pair, share is you ask a question, but you ask people to think about it for a moment by themselves. And then pair is get together with another person and find what they had in common. And then share is put 2 pairs together and find out what they had in common. And what it does is creates that opportunity to sort of move into what we have in common in your thinking. Usually the think is 3 minutes, pair, depending on how complicated the question is, 5 or 10 minutes, and then the share, you give them more like 15 or 20 minutes to talk together. Card storming. Are you feeling full already? I'll do one more. Card storming is, if you think about a normal approach, brainstorming, there's a person standing at the front of the room, they pose a question, they start recording on a flip chart paper. Well, what ends up happening in that context is the people that are comfortable participating in a outward fashion contribute more ideas, and the quiet people don't have as much to contribute. So it's not a very level playing field. So in a card storming, you give each person the same amount of paper. I use 6x8 Post-it notes. So these super giant Post-it notes. And I give each person 1 Post-it note, and I ask them to record, whatever your question is, record an answer on it. And then you put them on a wall and have the group organize them. So the similar ideas are clustered together and the not similar, so you can see how the room agrees with itself. So I've done all 3 of those. Next meeting, we're going to do something that's called brain walking, which is everybody starts at a piece of paper, a flip chart paper, and they answer the question. Then you move people and you move people and they reflect on what's been put up there.
Oh, wow.
So these are all techniques that work well with 20. It would be hard to do that one with 50.
Mm-hmm.
But at any rate, those are some techniques that get people not in an argumentative mode. I haven't done brain walking yet because I haven't felt the group was ready yet, but I think we're getting there.
And this is where I have to plug, if you haven't gone through IAP2's public participation techniques course, Wendy is one of the best facilitators there is. I took it a few years ago after I've been in this world for 15 years, and I learned so much from it. So I always have to put a plug in because we're really lucky to have Wendy here as a member of our chapter, and not just a great teacher as well.
Thank you, Liz.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot though one more time, because meeting ground rules, because I think I find that really helpful as well.
Mm-hmm.
With meeting ground rules, do you vocally share the meeting ground rules? If you use name tents, do you keep meeting ground rules on the back of their name tents? Do you have a poster of meeting ground rules? What do you like to do?
I have a poster. It's present in the room at all times. And that way, if somebody says, if I hear them say something, then I can say, wait a minute. It's actually on my floor right now because I used it last night, but I don't want to show you my rear end, so I'm not going to grab it. But I think having a present in the room is really important. I facilitated for a while the Hill Air Force Base Restoration Advisory Board, and they have them printed on the back side of name tents. And I thought that was really clever, but I've had a few people tell me they feel like it's communicating that you think people can't behave.
Mm. That's,
So it's an interesting thing
interesting.
how things land on people. But what I thought you were going to ask me is how do you get them in the beginning?
yeah, I was not. You're always ahead.
Well, sometimes I will anticipate what I think is necessary and have them already written down on flip chart
Mm.
paper. But sometimes I will go over the objectives for the session, the purpose of the session and the objectives, and ask the group what they think they need in place for them to be productive. If they create the ground rules, they own them.
Mhm.
If I create the ground rules, they have to accept them. It just depends. And sometimes really trivial stuff gets up there. Like you don't have to say anything about smart technology anymore. So if you say what ground rules, it's like turn off your cell phones, which I'm not saying that's a bad ground rule, but it's not as important as listen to each
Yeah.
other. So at any rate.
Sky, you have your hand up.
I did, and originally it was going to be the question that Wendy just answered herself. I
Oh.
was really curious, especially with this task force, a group of people that are continually working together, communicating. I was really curious how you came up with those ground rules. And I think it is important for a group like that to have more ownership in that, to come up with their own. So I'm just glad to hear that. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
I always like to start with some standard ground rules and then modify them depending on the group. If it's all right, I'm going to pull up the ground rules that
Okay.
we use. And I want to say, I think it works for today because they were actually Michelle Strobe, who was the former
Ah,
director
Yeah.
of the Environmental Dispute Resolution Center. She actually provided this to the city and she allowed us to use her ground rules for us to use them ourselves.
Oh, those are really good.
They're excellent. It's Michelle, just wonderful facilitator, and I'm really happy that she shared these with us. And what I like to do is at the beginning, generally these are the ones we stick to, and then I have the poster. I always try to keep a physical poster, Wendy, just like you do. Sometimes what I'll do is if people are getting just slightly out of hand, sometimes I'll actually walk. So their line of sight is me, and then they have to see the poster. Just a subtle way in case I don't want to call anyone out. I just try to, it's oftentimes what I do with loud talkers as well. I'll just slowly get closer to them until they feel a bit uncomfortable and they tone it down so someone else has a chance. But I always like to just keep these up. Just so people can see them. And I like having the multicolors so ideas pop with that. So I just wanted to share that.
I'm going to share some ground rules that I recently heard in a facilitation that was very good. There's 4, and I want to go through them, make sure I'm thinking them through properly. One is take space, which is when you have something to contribute, make sure that you give it to the room. Then make space, which means get out of the way and let other people do the same thing. And then the other 2 that are sort of paired are brave space. So have the courage to contribute, stuff that maybe feels kind of risky to share, but safe space. And that means everything that's said in this session is held in confidence. So learn here, listen to it here and take it, but don't take it in a way that's harmful to other people. So that's one that I'm sort of playing with. That set. I don't own them yet. They're not mine yet. I just think it's kind of interesting how they've worked around the word space for 4 different ones.
Does anyone else have ideas on how we can encourage good discussion in in-person sessions? I'll say something that I like to do is I always like to fall back on my core facilitation skills. And sometimes if I feel that it's going to be a rough session, this might be silly, but I actually review those skills. I have a little slide deck that just has the basic like active listening, and this is active listening, and this is how you encourage a passive participant. I mentioned the person who overshares. Like I sometimes, if I'm going into a situation, I go back and I'm like, make sure, I'm up on my facility. Because sometimes I admit I don't do it enough. So sometimes those skills, they go away. Practice makes progress. So that's just something that I have found helps me.
I think the
oh, I'm
mental
sorry.
preparation piece is really important. And I always do it for myself, but sometimes I'll actually ask a group to think about, sort of what are our intentions for being here together today. I'm gonna turn around and grab something and I'll be right back. Sorry. I have this deck of cards. It's reversed, isn't it?
No,
called
it's a group
GroupWorks.
works. Yeah.
Yeah.
It showed up.
And they have there's 91 cards in here. And they are cards for bringing people together, for convening people. And I don't know, group culture, guerrilla facilitation, harvesting, history and context. I will take 3 or 5 of them before each meeting and just focus on them. I think these are just so beautiful. The deck is $35 and they were open sourced when they were originally developed. A really amazing group of people developed them. And I think they're a great tool to have. So you can see how closely they were with my stuff from last night, because they run the whole gamut of thinking about flexibility and creativity and thinking about the space, the way that the space feels when people come and those kinds of things. So they're wonderful.
Nice. What do we think that as a profession and as P2 professionals, what do we think we need to consider for this? This could potentially be a new norm. You see a larger civil discourse. So just wondering what can we do? Because our jobs really are to facilitate good discussion, to help people work through issues, to find consensus. Any thoughts?
So I'm pretty new to all this. I haven't been to the training, just kind of instincts, doing public relations for public entities for several years. But it sounds to me that, we have in the past put a lot of effort into like the materials and, making sure everything's ready for the meeting. But it sounds like being more intentional about that dynamic is definitely going to need to take some time and some preparation. And trying to think about things in a framework from different perspectives, even some of those that you may be coming into the meeting or, event with a negative frame of thought, and trying to really put ourselves in their shoes to figure out how we're going to persuade them or bring them along, might be worthwhile.
Yeah. So. That's a great point.
I can share a little bit too. So I have a group that I've been overseeing for the last 3.5 years, and Sky's part of it. It's the Utah Rural Coordinating Council. And initially, when we used to gather, the whole premise really was for us as service providers to better communicate with each other, because we all work in rural Utah, but we don't really have someone sort of pulling all the strings. We each have our own funding sources and objectives, and it's hard to know what federal and state and universities and nonprofits are all doing. And because of it, our local leaders sometimes become confused over who to reach out to and when and all of that. So we gather together quarterly, and initially it used to be in person before the pandemic. And so I was really intentional on building relationships, and I would rotate the locations for every gathering. That way we could see each other's work environments. And it was a really beautiful way, especially after the meeting would end, because it would just be for an hour and a half for others to just converse with each other and build those relationships. And something that we lost during the pandemic was that relationship building piece of it. It became very task oriented, which is good in some ways, but I ended up doing a survey in early January of this year, because I was like, where is everyone at? Like, what are they craving out of the space, and how has that changed since we first started? And especially now that it's virtual, and so many of them were like, we just want to build relationship. And I've been thinking about this a lot for myself as a professional, and as I'm entering into these spaces with colleagues. I've just been like stripping down a lot, like the professional demeanor, I guess, is kind of fading for me in a bit, because what I really see is this desire for people to connect, and to be heard, and for there not to really be a facade. And so even the way that I dress, the things that I'll share, I've just started just stripping it more. And and even in those spaces too, I'm like, all right, we're going to take time where we're just going to talk to each other. There's not going to be a quote unquote objective or something that we have to work through. Like, I just want us to have some time to breathe, and to really connect to one another as humans, and to not have it be so hyper focused on productivity, because I'm seeing a lot of burnout in a multitude of ways. And so I'm trying to figure out, how can we replenish each other, and support each other, and be real with each other too. And so I'm curious I'm actually doing 2 focus groups in about 3 weeks. It's going to be for virtual, so I won't be able to have that in-person opportunity, but I am really curious, because I just see such a shift, and just kind of figuring out how do we communicate with each other in this time period, and how do we feel safe in doing so? And I don't know. I also have the opportunity to instruct at the U as well, University of Utah, and it's been really interesting sort of seeing my students, who are in their young 20s, and kind of seeing what they're envisioning for engagement. And it just, I don't know. I feel like I'm in the middle of seeing so many norms kind of shift in general, and I'm curious for where our younger generations are going to take us, and how we can move along with them instead of resisting the change that they're looking for. So sorry if it was a bit of a ramble, but I'm just trying to juggle through it in my own head, but it's very fascinating.
I would piggyback on that I think with the work from home part of what we've all been experiencing, obviously people are not dressing the same way, and their dogs might be there, or their cats might be there, or they might get interrupted by a child or a significant other. I think some of that veneer of the professional world has maybe helped all of us see that we don't have to have that space between us. But also, I think it's made me recognize the importance of actually figuring out real ways to connect with people. And eating is one, providing an opportunity for people to eat together. And public events, often the hosts have got some kind of rule. We can't feed them. We can't afford it. We're not allowed to pay for food. So I'm always trying to finagle a way around that one. Icebreakers is another idea. I'm not actually a real big fan of icebreakers if it's a serious topic. I mean, I worked for 2 decades at Idaho National Lab, and talking about radioactive waste is not a topic that really lends itself to people doing icebreakers. But the concept of providing an opportunity for people to be whole selves when they're in the room, in whatever way that means, inviting them to share what's going on with them today. So I think it takes rethinking about the time we spend together. That it doesn't need to be an hour of scripted, time, to make sure there's time for people to really present themselves in their wholeness. I do feel like people are a little more patient with that aspect than they used to be. Like if your cat walks in front of your monitor, nobody cares anymore. Whereas there was a period of time where you went, oh, don't do that, So, but I think in terms of returning to the real world again, I think everybody's a little uneasy. They don't know what, doesn't feel quite real, like we almost forgot how to do it. In this group that I'm working with, it's been interesting because I'd say 5 people are wearing masks, but the rest of the room is not. And I like that it's sort of accepted, however people are feeling safe in presenting themselves. The numbers are going up and down and up and down. So there's no conclusion that makes any sense about that. But it is interesting when somebody's trying to speak and they're wearing a mask, how it makes you have to kind of lean in to hear them better. So that sounds really interesting, Jordan.
I want to share too, something that I've been doing in my virtual space. I started it with my students, and then I started to just do it honestly in any larger group gathering. But I do this check-in before I start. And with my students, I'd be like, all right, it's a Likert scale, 1 through 10. 1, you do not want to be here at all the way up to 10, which is where you'd rather be nowhere else. Where is your energy at today? And that was always really a great way for me, because I couldn't read the room. I couldn't read the body language, and really being, confined to this sort of, and not seeing that full body expression, it allowed me to really in real time adjust. And so if I had a lot of 3s, 4s, and 5s, I was like, okay, we're pretty low energy today, so I'm not gonna push for more engagement. But if I had a lot of 7, 8s, and 9s, I was like, okay, we're ready for this. And so I don't know, I'd be curious if there have been other ways to kind of assess that, especially not more in a public setting too. But I don't know, that's been really helpful for me to kind of just assess where my group is and how to kind of adjust in real time.
I have not done that, but I really like that idea, because sometimes the traditional ways we say to get people to encourage, like calling them by name, and there is a lot of burnout, and maybe they don't want to participate that way. And I think that that's okay. We should allow that. I love the idea. If you don't mind me asking, is it sort of like you have a poll up on the Zoom so people can enter it and then you can see it, or do you ask them to like enter in chat? How do you do it?
We do it in the group chat. Yeah. So and this is another way for me to say their name out loud too.
Yeah.
So it's right in the beginning, and I'm like, all right, everybody put in your numbers. Where are you at? And so I'll be like, all right, Alice, you're at a 6. And I'll be like, James, you're at a 3. Thank you for being here. Basically anyone that has like usually a 3 or 4 or low, I usually thank them specifically for,
nice.
For being here. And then after I go through all their numbers, then I'm like, okay, I'm going to be real with you. Today I'm at a 6.5, or which really kind of helps them understand where I'm at as well. And so, yeah, it's just kind of been something that I've started to do. And now I'll do it with the Rural Coordinating Council or any sort of larger gathering. Just to, say their name, thank them that are a little bit low energy, but are still there. And for them all to kind of see where they're all at too as a group.
We do something similar for
Oh,
our
really?
statewide communications team, because we're spread all over. And so they started doing check-ins, daily check-ins when the pandemic started, before I started with UDOT. But usually about once a week or so, we'll start the meeting with, they call it 8 and happy. And so you pick a number, similar to what you're saying, but then you also have to pick a emotion to describe where you're at, because it just kind of helps if somebody, is feeling anxious, or if somebody is, like sometimes we're all busy, but is that, generating energy for us, or is that, maybe having negative impact? So we've adopted kind of a similar thing periodically, just because you do miss out on that being in person and knowing how people are feeling with all the other cues that we usually take, nonverbal cues.
It's sort of the same thing. I'll often just say one word, how are you presenting today?
Mm.
And, excited and happy or whatever, good. But some people will start with a word that's disappointed or worried and at least you know how to take care of them. The other thing is I often do a popcorn, especially if I have a number of people. And so I'm not calling on people and calling them out and asking them, but they will say, so Liz, you're next, right? And so they, it creates a little interesting energy in the room. You notice somebody hasn't spoken or something. And you can do that. It doesn't have to be at the beginning, but they decide who's speaking next. So that, and sometimes people will say, I'm going to call on Liz because I talked to her last week and she had a great idea, right? And so there's this way of introducing the other person that helps bring them into the room. I really like that dynamic.
Very cool. So
have we tried these things in person? Because I'm curious to see whether the skills we've learned online will come into the room.
I will say that I've done a session where we did popcorn. That is the one thing that I've done in person recently, and that did help. And for us, it was actually a group that was fairly unfamiliar. So we had name tags, the old school, stick them on. And so people were doing popcorn. So it was in a circle, and people were like calling out, oh, hey, Jim, and so we did it that way. And that seemed that we used that sort of as an icebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
But we did have a good conversation after that. It seemed like it relaxed the room a little bit.
Yeah.
So let me ask, how are people feeling? Hopeful? Burned out? Scared? All three?
I'm talking too much. Can I share?
I think so, please.
So last night was meeting 7 of my task force. And out of the 20 people, 2 are my problem children they're very full of themselves. They're not the same person. It's 2 different people, but meaning they have different perspectives, but they're very sure that they're right and domineering and not very warm towards other people in the room. Anyway, separately last night, they both came forward to me and said, I'll just channel one because I can remember what he said. He said, I've belonged to committees and task forces my entire life, and I have never been in a group where I felt that it was so inclusive of everybody in the room. You're really doing an excellent job of getting everybody's ideas out in the open, and I've appreciated learning what other people think. This is a guy that thought he knew the answers, and they were his answers. So, and the other guy came up and said, I'm really learning a lot here. And I'm so glad that I'm participating. I'm so glad I got selected for this task force. So as scared as I was after I heard about the dirtbag comment, I feel like I'm making progress with this group. It bothers me to think that we have to go through this laborious relearning how to behave socially process. I hope that it's not true, that maybe everyone's gradually getting those skills back as we move forward. But because it was like just as soon as the county said we could get together is when we started. So it was right out of the chute. But for a while there, I thought, oh my gosh, the rest of my life is going to be so hard if people behave like this going forward. But I think I see evidence of progress, and I don't think it's entirely my doing. I think that we are getting better at being in person again. I hope we are anyway. If we aren't, then our work is going to get harder and harder.
And Wendy, I appreciate that. I don't know how others feel, but I know that I had a bad session last night that all this morning I've been dealing with the repercussions of, but knowing that that gives me hope. And I don't know if anyone has any final thoughts, but I really just want to thank everyone for coming to this session today. This is presented by IAP2 Intermountain. Please know that you can always reach out to any of the officers. If you're in Utah, I'm your state rep. If you have any ideas what you'd like to do as a state, just let me know. But I want to thank everyone. Our next Learning Lunch series is going to be a presentation of a really cool engagement technique that I think some of us might have dabbled in, but we haven't explored. And I don't want to say anything else, but you'll see the announcement in an e-blast. Also, our next quarterly newsletter will be coming out in the next couple of weeks, so be on the lookout. So thank you, everyone, for joining today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for being here. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing all your